Hello and welcome back to Unlocking Digital Horizons 2024. This is our ICN Summit and we are coming to you from our Canberra office where we have a studio set up, and myself and Louise Wakefield are your MCs for the day. Look, what I'd like to do before we get into the next session is just to recognize our very important sponsors who, without them, this day wouldn't have been possible. The Australian Government, Department of Industry, Science and Resources, Construct Maps, and our silver sponsor, Innovation Central Canberra. Thank you so much to our sponsors. As I said, we'd just like to recognize them and the input that they've had into this day to make it a success. So thank you so much. Over to you, Louise.
Excellent. Well, we'd now like to welcome Chris Anderson, who is CISCO's Smart and Sustainable Real Estate Lead in Asia Pacific, Japan and China. Now, Chris is a tech and modern work enthusiast with a wealth of experience in workplace and smart building technology. He's worked in multiple areas of technology, including implementation, design and consulting, and has gained valuable insights from working across different market segments such as banking and finance, education and government. With a focus on delivering great employee experiences and greater sustainability, he is passionate about incorporating innovative technology and using data to enhance the built environment. Please welcome Chris to the stage.
Thank you, Louise and Mike. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Look, thanks so much everybody for having me today, and I've enjoyed so far the sessions this morning. I've been talking about change management and the impact and the need for driving obviously communications and driving change within the organisation. I think is a really important kickoff, and great to see that first up. I'd like to look at maybe a little bit of a conversation around how, if we think about how we unlock ICT and we start to drive and head towards unlocking the digital horizons, I think one area of interest where we've spent a lot of time and investigation is how the impact of technology can drive through the built environment, through physical buildings. And I think it's great to be here as a part with Innovation Central Canberra. Naturally, that being a partnership between CISCO and the University of Canberra to help drive and provide industry and government with world-class research opportunities. So looking at things and some areas like how technology drives sustainability, how you can harness AI and drive and use better data, and using that in research projects has been really valuable. I've been spending a lot of time with ICC. And I think, again, this area of how we start to drive smarter technology to drive buildings, I think is a really interesting conversation. So that's why I thought the title of Smart Foundations Enabling Digital Skies was probably an interesting topic of conversation, because I see a lot of areas that technology can disrupt and sort of make this space better. And if we think about what we've talked about a lot with organisations over the last number of years, especially over the last 4 or 5 years, we've got a lot of organisations who are trying to drive change across their organisation with a lot of different sort of trends that are occurring around how people are working today, how technology is playing a role, and really that blur and the merging between the physical space and the digital space when it comes to the way people are working, driving more productive use of where they choose to spend their time, whether it be in the office or working remotely. And if you look at some of the balancing elements of that, looking at the way a number of organisations are really trying to attract and get people back into using the office more frequently. We see driving that and driving the experience for employees being really important, especially across Australia. We've got a really geographically dispersed workforce and potential to tap into lots of different areas of the world, or even Australia, in terms of being able to get the right people into the right jobs. But we also balance that with organisations having a lot of cost and money going into their physical buildings, and with people not coming back into the office as much as they did pre-pandemic. That balancing act of how do we actually get the most out of our real estate investment and make sure that we're getting the most out of our workforce as well. And so those things start to become really interesting conversations. And then when we look also at what I think is an important conversation, when we start to think about that balance of how do we enable a hybrid workforce and enable people to work from wherever they are, but also take into consideration the fact that a key drive for so many organisations that I'm talking to now is about how do we be more sustainability focused, and how do we drive towards net zero, with a lot of organisations looking at how they actually balance and measure their carbon usage. And if you think about it, one of those things, those two things are kind of pulling apart is, how do I have a hybrid workforce that can work from anywhere? Therefore, that means that I've got completely unpredictability in terms of the way the building is being used. On a Monday, it might be completely quiet. On a Friday, it might be quiet, but Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, it's really busy. And so how do we start to cater for an unpredictable wave of the way the buildings are being used, while at the same time driving more sustainability? And I think that's a bit of a conundrum. Those two things pulling each other apart, I think, means that the ultimate answer that we've started to see is that the building needs to become smarter and needs to become more tuned with the way people are using it. So, we know that we need to expend energy. And if we think about the way, buildings are being used, about 37% of carbon emissions globally is caused by building and construction. And probably 50% of that is about operating buildings. The carbon and the energy expended in operating a building is really significant. And so it's no longer acceptable to have buildings that are open and running and expending energy when there's no people in them. So one of the key areas that we think innovation can really help is bringing those two things together and driving a smart capability across buildings and spaces in the building. And so what we've been doing is talking to customers and looking at innovating in the ways that we can drive a few different key areas. Number one is how we actually help organisations get people and attract people back in to use the buildings more frequently, because we're creating experiences that deliver value of being there, rather than working from home and feeling more productive because you've got that one-on-one relationship with your technology. And yet when you come into an office, you are fighting for a shared space to work and the technology experience is not as strong. How do we actually start to drive and remove those hurdles of people coming in and using the space? Secondly is, how do we drive more communication about the environment? So a strong focus from a lot of organisations that I've been speaking to is around how the health and wellbeing and the environmentals inside a building are really important today. People want to understand that the air quality is good. They want to be able to measure and respond to elements like carbon dioxide levels in the air and those sorts of things. And when we talk to a lot of facilities teams who are managing the buildings, they want to drive and build greater experiences for health and wellbeing inside the building. Thirdly, of course, is space optimization. We need to be able to use technology and use innovation to be able to optimize the way space is being used. And the opportunity to reduce the amount of space we use means that we can actually take dollars off the books, drive a better experience inside a building. And then, of course, as I mentioned, driving sustainability targets and elements from as we head towards net zero and start to become more focused about reducing carbon emissions. And so what we're seeing as we talk to a lot of organisations is that so many of them are at a point where they're looking at how can we actually start to now redefine what our need is of a physical building. And part of that comes to, we think we need less space because people aren't using the building the way they used to. Utilisation levels are down. We want to create a lively environment where the office feels more, exciting and people can collaborate. And a side effect of having too much space is it feels dead and quiet and less lively. So, optimizing and getting to the right balance of space means that it'll be a more lively environment. It'll be more cost effective. And so we're seeing this view of people measuring how their space is being used so that they can then define and redefine what they need from their office space. And so we see less space, but we also see that those spaces need to be higher quality because they need to drive the efficiencies and more efficient use of the space. They need to create an environment and experience for employees to have a positive experience. And that, in turn, will then flatten out the costs for organisations as they start to move forward. But I guess the big question is, what is higher quality and how does that start to be able to be delivered in a building to make a greater experience for people? What we see is that we need to start to look at how we reimagine that experience and use technology. Technology is now a really, really important part of the building. And in a lot of circumstances in the past, the building has sort of been more focused about physical space, and then technology's been an afterthought of how do we actually make a screen fit into this space, or how do we make a space experience work well. And the technology's been the last thing that people think about. Whereas what we've started to do is examples of how technology and digital actually become entrenched and designed into the building so that it is more of a digital experience inside a building. And I'll share a couple of examples as we sort of move forward. But, really basically what we realize is that most people using a building today are going to be collaborating or working with somebody who's not in the building. So we've sort of started to measure a little bit about this, and we see that almost every meeting, probably 95% of meetings, have somebody who's in a remote location or who might be working from home that day, might be a customer in a remote location as well. So the need for each space in a building to be able to deliver the connectivity to the outside world is really important. And that also needs to be based on any platform that people are using. So, the ability to be able to connect to anybody on their choice of conferencing equipment is another one that's always been a challenge across organizations. But also creating that inclusive experience. So, balancing up the people who are working remotely and having them feel as engaged and as involved in a conversation or a meeting as the people who are sitting in the room face to face. And so there's technology that can really start to drive and improve that experience. And then, of course, that technology, and what I'll share with you is some insights, is what we think is the information technology equipment that's now being deployed inside a building needs to play a role of not just doing its primary job, right? So it might be connecting people to the computer network. It might be giving them access to their data. At the same time, that technology in a building knows what's happening inside that building. It knows how many people are inside a particular space. It knows where people are connected because they're connected to a wireless network. And that has the ability, based on a radio strength and those sort of things, to understand the physical location of people. So that technology then also needs to do its role in empowering real estate decisions. So it can share information and occupancy insights and be able to then help an organization measure and understand exactly how their environment is being used so that they can start to do things like reduce the amount of floor space that they have. So, of course, naturally, we have the physical elements. So we think about the kinds of spaces that we're seeing starting to occur here as a building and your office is becoming more about people coming in and socializing and collaborating and being together, getting those water cooler conversations going and getting the engagement going inside a space. So we're starting to see a lot of design shift in terms of the way buildings are being designed. We're creating all these different types of spaces where collaboration can occur. We're creating smaller spaces where people could go and work and get some concentrate space for a period, but also lots and lots of collaboration spaces where you might have one-on-one engagements using a physical building connecting to somebody remotely. So, that physical element in terms of consideration has changed, and technology is changing that. But also, of course, the intelligence that goes with the way technology is driving digital experiences in buildings. So being able to do things like create, experiences where all background noise is removed in a virtual meeting, by having intelligence that is listening and tuning out the things that are not needed in the environment. And this is actually something I think that has just become table stakes over the last few years, as this has just become so powerful that the remote and collaborative engagements online have become so much more effective by the automation of AI to remove sound in the background and improve the experience. Another area where we've been investing is actually how that technology and things like camera systems inside spaces can drive greater experiences as well. And as I mentioned before, a little bit about the view of balancing inequality inside a space. We're starting to do things with innovation here where multiple camera systems would be involved in a meeting space, and therefore creating an equitable experience for people. As for example, somebody sitting at a table and starts to talk to somebody across the table, the camera's system is intelligent enough to know that they've changed from facing the front of the room, and the camera at the front should then deliver them to the remote party, to switch dynamically as soon as they switch and turn sideways. Instead of the camera getting the side of their face, the camera then will switch and use the camera on the other side of the room to pick them up front on. And all of that now is using computer vision, where the computer can actually work out how people are facing, and using AI to be able to work out the best view that they should deliver inside a meeting experience. And so that's one area that we're seeing starting to drive, powerful experiences all the way down from the smaller space up to larger spaces, like even learning spaces and, tutoring spaces and those sorts of things. That, of course, being extracted from a software platform. So many different organizations are using many different collaboration tool sets. So this intelligence needs to happen below that so that you could join any sort of meeting experience and have that intelligence delivered for you from your physical spaces. The other area where this technology, as I mentioned before, your investment in technology needs to be smarter in that it's delivering a primary use case like this and giving a great experience inside a meeting space. But at the same time, it also needs to start to do more intelligence to help and aid the building to work more optimally. So, for example, the technology inside meeting spaces now are able to determine how many people are inside that space, and it's able to create a zone. So even if that was an open collaborative area, for example, it would be able to detect that somebody's inside a particular zone, and then the camera system applies its intelligence to be able to deliver good meeting experiences. So as soon as I step out of that zone and maybe go and sit at the desk, like you see there in the image on the right, the camera recognizes that I'm no longer participating in that meeting and then removes and doesn't focus in on me and doesn't zoom in on me outside that area. But the other thing that is also doing is the intelligence that we're providing inside computer vision is allowing things, for example, like this information to be delivered in real time for facilities teams to understand what's happening. So, for example, as somebody steps inside to that meeting space, the system within a couple of seconds is actually able to reflect exactly how many people are inside that space. So it will continually count up and provide a real-time status view of what's happening inside meeting spaces, because it knows as soon as somebody steps over the door line to move into that space, it's considered inside the space. And so this data is starting to help to drive better experiences for facilities teams to be able to measure what's happening inside spaces. But also it's now starting to be used more intelligently in delivering experiences across the building. So for example, this is a view of our Singapore office in which you walk into the lobby and you're presented with a digital twin of the building. So this is the example of where ICT investment and the technology coming with it is starting to drive better experiences across the building. You're immediately presented with a view of the entire floor of that space, and you could go and select upstairs or downstairs and see what's happening across the floor. And basically what you can start to see here is that you could find a space that's available just by seeing the green status of that space. And you can go into that, whether it's from your computer or from a mobile application or from that kiosk, and you can start to see exactly what's happening inside the space. There's a couple of other things that are occurring there too, is the technology in the meeting room and the camera systems are counting people and representing that. So you see here the view of occupancy across the space. That's represented facilities teams in a central view as well, so that they can monitor that constantly. But it also is providing the temperature and the air quality and the status of the space as well. So you can start to measure the quality of the environment too and start to see how that's all responding. And you can address that really quickly if, for example, there might be paint fumes or cleaning fumes that are creating a negative experience in the building. Those things will show up and be triggered so that you can address them. The other thing that this is doing is then what we've done in some spaces. You'll see an image on the right-hand side there of our New York office. What it's starting to do is allow much more dynamic use of space, because the intelligence in the meeting space is recognizing that there is somebody there, and therefore the system goes red straight away. So instead of needing to go into your calendar and find a space that's available, you can simply go here and see at a glance a space that I can walk into and start to consume. From a user of this space, I don't need to do anything but walk in, and the system will automatically then reflect that for everybody else. So it's starting to drive much more efficient use of space, because we no longer have blocks and time periods where the room is booked out by somebody but somebody's not shown up, so the room's sitting there empty but booked. Instead, this is much more real-time use of space, and we're starting to work with a lot of organizations to get that right balance of reducing bookable space and having dynamic space much more prevalent, so that you can get those efficiencies in the building, which is ultimately reducing the amount of space that you need overall. And the next thing about that is then the next flow of the way intelligence and data starts to flow here. So using AI and using this information and sharing this data means that we can start to drive workflows such as optimizing energy usage inside the building too. So what we're doing, for example, is we're working with building air conditioning providers and building management systems to be able to start to invoke changes based on what it's seeing in real time in the building. So as I mentioned before, the way we can start to optimize buildings based on the way the building's being used, much more up and down. So we can respond by having the camera system automatically share what's happening inside all of these spaces. And we're working with organizations like Honeywell and Schneider Electric and those providers of systems that then control and adjust the heating and cooling in a building to start to do zone-based control of heating and cooling. One of the key things about this is heating and cooling probably equates to about 40% of your energy usage in a building. So being able to fine tune that, we believe, can save about 30% of the cost of that. So that starts to become a really important way that we can fine tune and respond to the way the building's being used and drive more efficiencies in that way. So really what we're sort of talking about here is the role that ICT technology can play in starting to drive smarter and more sustainable buildings. Technology now is becoming the one of the most important elements in a building. It's starting to be equaled up with power and gas and electricity and water. So driving intelligent technology across the building starts to become a key area. And what we're seeing at CISCO is some of the areas that can start to participate here are the kinds of things that you would invest in to enable connectivity and enable productivity inside your buildings. Things like the wireless network that connects people and gives them access to their data, meeting spaces, so those camera systems that enable them to connect and communicate and collaborate, as well as the underlying network itself, so being able to actually deliver and control the environment via that. And then, of course, there's other elements that are starting to give a huge amount of value by being connected is the CC and security cameras. Being able to connect and not just share security data and maintain a secure environment, but also be able to track footfall across people entering and leaving the building so that you get a clear view and an understanding of what's happening across your space. Lastly, being able to visualize all of that data and bring that data together in a platform so that you can build views across your building of what's happening. Maybe bringing into it things like, for example, your Office 365 data where, your office calendar knows who's scheduled in the building and who might be booking out meeting spaces. It could also compare that data to somebody who's in the building because they're connected to the network. So we start to be able to create intelligent workflows that understand if you're in the building, but you're actually on a different floor, and in 5 minutes' time you're due to use a meeting space, maybe you're not going to be there on time, or maybe you're not intending to use that meeting space anymore. So we can start to create intelligent workflows where we could actually free up that meeting space, return it for use so that we start to optimize and drive more intelligent use of space across the building. Similarly, of course, on the left-hand side, the view from the space visualization across the floor, being able to drive things like desk booking so that you can, optimize the number of desks you have, driving wayfinding so people who may not be in the office as frequently will be able to actually scan a QR code and it'll take them to the desk they've booked or the meeting space that they're reserving, and those sorts of things as well. So I thought I'd just share that as an insight into some of the ways that we see, IT technology being able to drive and make buildings more efficient. So, being able to digitize your real estate using that investment you have in ICT. So I might pause there and ask if there was any questions or comments.
Thanks, Chris. I knew that you were going to expand my mind by your presentation, and it never ceases to amaze me how advanced things are moving and how fast things are moving, where we can be using data to sort of map how we use buildings and things like that. I just love it. So we do have a few questions if you're happy to take a few.
Absolutely.
So excellent. So Hamilton was wondering about balancing out the use of smart meters and heating and aircon costs when you're, retrofitting that type of technology when you've got poor insulation or building layouts to start with. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, look, I think so. It's a real balance. I know that we've driven some really powerful efficiencies in buildings, and one example is Our New York office is the Penn One Plaza in New York, which is a 50-year-old building. And it's horrendously bad with insulation and, like solar efficiencies and those sorts of things. And, there's obviously the physical elements that you need to address in terms of driving a building for better insulation and things. But what we were able to do is things like only run the heating when the sun wasn't out. And we had, solar sensors on the side of the building to understand when the sun was then creating warmth in the building and actually follow that in the time of day patterns. So we could actually reduce the amount of heating and let the solar and the sun coming in to address that. So, yeah, lots of different ways. Similarly with blinds and interacting with blinds in the reverse. So when, on a warmer day when the sun's coming out, to be able to actually have the blinds retract so that it's not going to heat up and you're not going to have to drive more cooling as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. A lot of the feedback we get from SMEs is that they don't always know where to start with these things, and there's a lot, with legislative changes and trying to keep up with all the requirements and compliance complexities. So, what advice would you give to SMEs who are looking to collaborate with larger enterprises like CISCO on smart building projects?
Oh, look, I think that's probably one of the really powerful ways that the ICC is helping drive this. So the innovation projects that can be run from there to sort of measure and test and help share use cases. I think really importantly too is that we don't get caught up necessarily in smart building technology that has to be from the ground up, so that, you have to have a brand new building in order to implement this. So, one really important area is defining the kinds of use cases that would be valuable and scalable down to small business. I think that's an important area too. This technology and the blend of using ICT technology not just gives you greater capabilities in a building, but it allows that to be more cost effectively implemented, so that you're not spending money on parallel technology to get these smarts. So I think, probably an area to start is, we can share some use cases and we can share some of the areas that you could impact without making major building changes.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be so overwhelming, does it? Incremental small changes can make a huge difference. That's good advice. Angela has been obviously very impressed with some of the smart technology information that you've shared with us. She's asking, can existing systems be integrated into smarter systems, or does a whole new ICT approach need to be taken in a public building?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think similarly to, we don't have capability to start from ground up. So we need to look at the way that these capabilities can be embedded and included and connected with existing systems. And there is obviously a bit of a scale about how that can be done. So naturally, some of the things we're doing is we're doing things like working with the building provider to understand how their air conditioning systems are enabled, for example. And so there's a few little, precursors or prerequisites to be able to connect into those systems. But yeah, absolutely. What we're doing is finding ways to securely connect that to the network. And obviously with a massive consideration around cybersecurity too, right? We know that connecting data to the network needs to be securely connected. So we've got some really powerful mechanisms to do that and segment and control the information, but at the same time then connect legacy systems in so that they can be sharing their data and being able to be optimized.
Awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. Look, I've certainly learnt an enormous amount from your presentation, and it's mind-blowing to see what is possible. And it's almost space tech. And for me, being a fairly young geezer, I can certainly not relate to any of it right now, but at the same token, just having moved into a new home and seen what's possible with wireless technology, where I don't have to pay for a ongoing alarm system, as an example, and can actually install it myself. The technology is already there, right? And I'm using a very simple case because I'm a simple person, but you've certainly brought a whole new perspective to what's possible and how it interacts and interfaces with our net zero initiatives and working towards those climate initiatives, which is, very topical,
Mm.
and something that I think our SMEs grapple with every day. And there is this sort of apprehension to jump on the bandwagon when it comes to that. So by bringing it into your business as a natural course and having the benefit from saving from an energy perspective, and also utilizing it for technology advancement, is phenomenal. Chris, thank you again so much. Really appreciate the time. I know you're a busy man, and thank you again for joining us for your presentation. It's been wonderful.
Very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Chris. Awesome. So before we close the session out, I just wanted to remind everybody that our next session is with Melissa Hankinson, who's the Director for Service Experience and Improvement at the University of Canberra, and that will be starting shortly, so please don't go anywhere. And also remember that you can keep the conversation going on socials, which we'd love you to do. And I know I've been, tagging a few people along the way, and everybody's part of the journey. I might send another update, but anyway. Also, don't forget to submit your testimonial to be in the running for a free premium subscription, an ICN subscription, so you can see our logo there, and we thought we'd just make a bit of a plug, and that value is just under $1,500 for our premium subscription. So please just submit your testimonial, and we'll be sure to let you know who the successful candidate is. So thank you, and we will see you very soon.
ICN started back in 1984 in Victoria, and the reason we started was to give small businesses an opportunity to link up with projects. Very soon, we spread across the country and onto New Zealand as well. The reason for our success? The reputation that we have built over the years with project owners. Don't forget that we have a very committed and skilled team of consultants across the country working in our local ICN offices. They verify the small businesses that they work with and link them up with the projects. There are no restrictions when it comes to the project side of things. We can work with anyone locally, regionally, and even globally. However, if you happen to be a small business, you need to be registered in Australia or New Zealand.